Okay, so let's get back into some styling stuff. But before we really focus anymore on working specifically with the style sheet that comes with your underscores theme, I want to go ahead and just do something that's a really simple demonstration of the differences between M and REM. I think that that's confusing to a lot of people, and so I want to make sure in a really simple HTML file that I can show you kind of the concepts of how this works. Um, and I'm still going to base it off of some of the principles that we're using specifically in that style sheet with underscores. So if you were to be reading along in the book, I think it's really actually very helpful. But if you read along in the book, one of the things that you're going to find is that um, he talks about the reset section of the style sheet. And so the only portion from the reset section that I've kind of pulled out is just this one declaration of font size that is attached to HTML. There are some other declarations that are part of that reset for HTML in the style sheet. So don't confuse this with the actual style sheet of underscores. This, again, to reiterate, is specifically just so we can do a really simple example of the difference between M and REM. So in our reset, what we've done is we've created a font size of 62.5%. And the reason, and the author explains this from the book, that we're doing that is that it corrects some resizing that is odd in Internet Explorer 6 and 7. And at some point, we're going to not have to worry about Internet versions, Explorer version 6 and 7. But if you are still really concerned about, backwards compatibility and stuff for graceful degradation, then this is useful. So what you can do is on the HTML tag selector, you can go ahead and scale down the font size, but then in the body, what we can do is, this is not part of the reset, by the way, this is part of our normal typography rules. What we can do is we can declare the font size in pixels first. And again, this is a fallback measure. Whenever you put the font size in pixels and then you do font sizes in immediately after in some sort of relative unit of measure like M or REM, that means that some of the older browsers that don't understand REM or even M, but that's really long ago, but mostly the ones that don't understand REM, it will have a fallback to 16 pixels. Now, the standard, just so you understand that the standard for a single unit of measure that's a normal 100% native readable text on a browser is going to approximately equate 16 pixels. And so that's why we're starting there with 16 pixels. And then just so you also understand that whenever we talk about M, just plain old EM, all right, that is sort of like also saying 100%. So if you were to look at 16 pixels and the equation for that in ems would be 1.6 m, or in this case 1.6 rem. And let me explain to you what this 1.6 rem is doing. This is setting based off of the initial size, which was in our reset, the 62.5%. Rem goes to the root, okay? A lot of people will call it relative ems, but really what it's doing is it's going to the root of the document to find what the original font size setting was, and it's going to go based off of that. And because everything is a descendant technically of the HTML selector, then that would be, if you've got font size set there, then that would be where your root font size is going to be declared. Now, that means that it's going to be based off of this original 62.5%. So originally, if we were to say 100%, let me show you what happens if I go here and where it says HTML, and I change this to 100%. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Here, let's do, my cursor's freaking out on me here. Let's do this. Let's change that to 100%. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go over here and hit refresh. You see everything got bigger. And the reason is because I had originally scaled it down, and because our body, which is going to be the next in line below the HTML selector, right? It's going to be the next major thing that's going to affect anything that's in our display screen, right? I'm saying go to the root level, which is declared here, and make it 1.6, or sort of like, saying, I guess like 160% of the original document font size, right? And so if I'm saying here that it's 100%, then I'm saying, okay, this is approximately being 160% of 100%, so it's about 60% larger. So that's one of the reasons why, if we're using this 62.5% to correct stuff in Internet Explorer, and I hit save, now what you see is that because this declaration is setting the initial base that's, well, I shouldn't say initial, but it's setting the base size that's based off of our HTML font size, then it's sort of used like a global control. So if I go ahead and save this and I hit refresh again, you'll see that it goes back down, right? And so if you don't like the base font size being, you know, 1.6 rem, you could see what happens at 1.8 rem. Let's save that and hit refresh, and you see that everything gets bigger. Oh, except for, look at this. The H1 didn't get bigger. Let me show you why. If you look down here in our H1 style, look what it's doing. Our H1 style is saying that it wants the font size to be 28 pixels or 2.8 rem. And so what happens then is that it's basically bypassing, when I say rem anywhere else down inside the document, if I say I want something to be in rems, it bypasses this entire body setting and it goes all the way back up to the root M value. All right, it goes back up to the very root of the document to get its setting. So think of rem as root M, okay? If you think of it, it goes back to the very root initial setting that's going to a cascade down through the entire document, and it's going to look for it that way. Okay, now if I were to change this on the H1, if I were to change this to M instead, let's save that. Come back over here, let's refresh, and you see that now it's doing what is referred to as an accretive change. Accretive means that it's compounded, it's built up on itself because the H1 is a descendant of the body, okay? Since I'm not using root M anymore, right, or relative M's, I am using just plain old M. What it's doing is it's taking on its natural accretive state and it's saying, I want to compound what my parent had set up for me. And basically what the parent did was it went ahead and it said, look, we're going to make it, oh, I should have changed this to 18. You should make these match. Like if you're going to say 18 pixels or 1.8 rem, you should say 18 pixels. And again, this font right here is just a fallback in case this part doesn't work in a browser. But anyway, because I changed this from being root, so it no longer goes up here, but it just goes to its parent. All right, it's going to sit there and build on all of its ancestors. Then now it's going to be able to take a larger size. It doesn't go to the 62.5% anymore. It goes up here to the font size being basically 180% of 62.5%. Okay, I know that might seem a little bit confusing at first, but you know, I just want you to understand that all of this stuff is important in understanding the difference and how these things are being used in different places. And the other thing too is that you might want to be able to, you know, if you were using M's pretty much for most of what your page is, let's say that you're using M's everywhere, so that you can have accretive changes like here. If I wanted to change this div, see the div is the parent, right? And right now I've got the div set at font size of 1M, which is fine because 1M is the same as basically saying 100% of its parent, okay? So that's why it doesn't look any different. But if I were to go here and say, you know what, I want everything just in this div to be much bigger, but not anywhere else, then I could come over here and I could say, let's say 1.3M, save that. And because all of its children, meaning the H1 is a child and the paragraph is a child, you can see here that they're children of this div. Because those are children and they're also set in M's, then they also are accretive, and then therefore this little fine-grained control of the parent being changed, it's going to cascade down and it's going to make a difference here too. Okay, so like if you wanted to look at this in sort of terms of percentages, and whenever I say percentage, it's better to use M instead of percentages in this case, okay? But If I were to look here and say font size is, 2.8 em, it's the same as me saying it's 280% of its parent setting, which already was 130% of its parent setting, which was this, which was 180% of this. So anyway, the point is that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So that's kind of where the danger is in just doing everything in em, is that if you're not paying close attention, you're going to start getting all of this accretive change happening, and maybe it's harder to control it, right? And that's why some people like to go ahead and use rems, is because then they can just go and just do a global change up here, and then that's the only thing that will actually affect the whole page. Because remember, if I were to go back down here and say change this font size for the heading level 1 to a rem, remember now if I change that, it's going to look up here to the root base size. All right, it's going to bypass this body, right, and it's going to go back up here to the HTML. And let's save that and let's do a test, and you see it goes back down to being small again. But now we have a problem because we're doing our paragraph in em, and we've got this div. And so like if I took this div out, this is where you want to be really careful not to, if you're going to put a font size on an entire container instead of an actual text element, like a text element would be like an H1 or a paragraph or a list item or something like that. But if you're going to put it on an entire container like div, right, then that means it's going to cascade down and affect anything else that also has a font size unless it's in rems. So I would be careful to avoid doing this kind of thing unless you really know what you're doing to control the size. So if I get rid of that and I save this, my paragraph becomes more reasonable because I'm not kind of like amplifying it. It's almost like looking at ems as amplifiers, okay, whenever you look at them in terms of being descendants and ancestors and stuff. Okay, so hopefully that is helpful. And if you don't fully understand this, the best way to really understand this is to go and make your own little file. And you can do this if you want in your initially in your underscore style sheet that you're using. But I actually would find, it's going to be a lot more efficient for you to kind of test in a really simple HTML document to test your knowledge and make sure you fully understand what's happening, without all of the other stakes of, having that literally like hundreds and hundreds of lines of code that can ultimately be affected by all of this stuff. I find that sometimes doing these really simple knowledge-based things, it's really easy to just do like in an HTML file to test your knowledge, okay? And that's the best way you're going to learn it, is for you to just play around with something really quick. All right, now we're going to move on to using the actual style sheet.